Welcome. You are listening to the Fat and Furious podcast. In this podcast series, your host, Steve Bennett, father of 7, best-selling author and adventurer, will be joined by 23 of the world's most forward-thinking medical professionals. Doctors, authors, and top nutritionists, where he'll share the truth behind living healthier and happier for longer.
In this episode, I'm going to be talking to Dr. James DiNicolantonio. James is a cardiovascular researcher, scientist, and a doctor of pharmacy. He's the author of the best-selling The Salt Fix, a brilliant book carrying the subtitle, Why the Experts Got It All Wrong and How Eating More Salt Might Save Your Life. He's also the co-author of Superfuel and most recently a brilliant book called The Longevity Solution. James is a well-respected and internationally known scientist, and he's also an expert on health and nutrition. He once even testified in front of the Canadian Senate regarding the harms of added sugar. James is an associate editor of the BMJ Open Heart, a journal that's published in partnership with the British Cardiovascular Society. I'm with Dr. James DiNicolantonio, but I've probably pronounced that wrong, James. How should I pronounce your name?
You got that right, DiNicolantonio.
Well, honestly, mate, a real pleasure to be here with you. My wife probably isn't your biggest fan because last Christmas, every spare minute I had, I was reading this book, The Salt Fix, and I was absolutely fascinated, and that led me on to your other books. And then we were on holiday, my wife and I, about a week ago, and I was reading The Longevity Solution, which honestly is one of the best books I've ever read, and I really want to question you a lot about this today because there's really some insightful stuff. But before we get going into all the books you've authored, tell us a little bit about what got you into medicine to start off with.
Well, originally, I wanted to be a lawyer, actually, because I love to argue, I love to research, and I come from a family of pharmacists, so I ended up, getting my doctor of pharmacy at the University of Buffalo, and basically, I wrestled, I ran cross country, so I've always been into, physical fitness, and basically, when I started learning more about medications, I started realizing with my patients, maybe it's better to prevent the actual diseases from occurring in the first place so they don't even need to take medicine. And really that's kind of what led me to start, researching about salt and nutrition and things like that.
So you start off as a doctor and then obviously, you become this amazing author. You've written 3 incredible books. I'm sure there's more in you. What was that transition between that doctor-patient relationship to the point of going, I want to do more, I want to help more people? What was that sort of transition?
Yeah, so when I was a community pharmacist, I was having patients that were being put on, low salt diets because they came into their doctor's office, they had high blood pressure. The first thing your doctor is going to tell you to do is lower your salt intake. They don't really tell you that salt is an essential mineral, not to go too low. They just give you a blanket statement, lower your salt intake. And I was having a lot of patients coming up to me saying, Dr. James, I don't feel very good. I feel dizzy and lightheaded, especially when I go from like a seated to a standing position. And I sort of pushed back and said, tell your doctor the symptoms that you're having, maybe get your sodium levels checked. And a lot of times their sodium levels in their blood were low, and the doctor would tell them to start eating more salt, and they instantly started feeling better. So as soon as I saw that impact in the community, I realized that I wanted to help a broader audience by writing a book about the importance of salt.
Well, fantastic. Let's talk about the Salt Fix then, because for many, many years before I got my health back on track, all those years I was obese, there was one thing that was never in my pantry at home, and that was salt. Because of what my doctors had told me, because of what I'd read, it was banned in our house, and friends would come around for dinner and they'd say, oh, can I add some salt? We'd go, no, we don't have it in the house. And then to read that book over Christmas and to go, crikey, maybe salt's not that bad at all. It really got me thinking, and there's some great stats in the book. But for those that haven't read the book, give us a 5-minute spin on why salt is so important, why, if anything, many of us that are probably living more primally now, that have started to cut the carbs down,
probably want more of it. Give us a bit of your thought on that.
Well, I mean, it's not your fault that you thought salt was bad. I mean, it's been ingrained in our minds for over 40 years. We've kind of been predisposed and predetermined to believe that salt is this toxic poison when really it's an essential mineral. And really the advice comes from back 40 years ago. It seems to start off in the United States a lot, this bad nutritional dogma. But it all began with the 1977 dietary goals. And they told us to eat low fat, eat a high carb diet, cut your salt intake. And it was literally based on zero evidence. There was no evidence that lowering salt intake would actually reduce the risk of hypertension or cardiovascular events. In fact, at the time, the US Surgeon General report admitted there was actually no evidence that a low salt diet would prevent the age-related increase in blood pressure. So even though they recommended a low salt diet, there was an admission that there actually wasn't any evidence for that. What they did, though, was they inappropriately extrapolated benefits from a small group of people. And they basically blanket statemented to everybody that a low salt diet is going to significantly reduce blood pressure in everyone. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So 8 out of 10 people with normal blood pressure are not salt sensitive. 7 out of 10 people with prehypertension are not salt sensitive. And even 55% of people with full-blown high blood pressure are not salt sensitive. So we basically were given a blanket statement to potentially benefit the minority, blanket statement for the majority based on just a small population of hypertensive people.
And could this, I mean, I read once that salt and sugar sort of are the enemies of each other. So if you put a lot of salt in your food, you don't need so much sugar, and therefore could it be as simple as well that maybe those sugar lobbyists, those big sugar corporations thought that, well, if we can get them to take salt out, we can put more sugar in. And certainly if we can make out salt's the bad guy, it's more of, I don't know, a mask, a cover for the damage sugar was doing maybe?
100%. So if they could blame the harm on hypertension, heart disease on another white crystal instead of sugar, salt, well, they're going to win. That's a big win. And so you're right. I mean, even up until about the year 2000, the World Health Organization was definitely influenced by big sugar. They threatened to pull money from funding. And so really, sugar was admitted in the dietary guidelines to not cause diabetes or cardiovascular disease, despite numerous clinical trials actually showing that it did increase the risk of diabetes. So you're right. They definitely used salt as the enemy, so the blame would get off of sugar.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. In the last few months, we've interviewed a gentleman called Ivor Cummins, and then Dr. Seem Malhotra, Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, 3 real big people that know about the heart and specialize in the prevention of CVD. And not one of them yet has said that salt is a problem. You know, I asked them many, many times, give me the list of things that might cause heart attacks. Give me the list of things to prevent it. And yet salt just hasn't come up in any of those conversations.
Yeah. And I mean, I think, what people need to understand is the physiology of how our body regulates salt. If you have normal kidney function, you're just going to pee out what you don't need. So it's better to get more and let your body eliminate what it doesn't need than not get enough of it, because we cannot manufacture and synthesize salt. We have to get it in the diet. It's an essential mineral. So when you're deficient, there's nothing the body can do to make up for it. But if you're getting more than you need, your body will just pee out the rest. To give you an example of how good the kidneys are at filtering salt, our kidneys filter a full teaspoon of salt every 5 minutes. Wow. So how we're taught that 1 teaspoon of salt is going to give us, a heart attack or a stroke. Our kidneys filter that every 5 minutes. That's how salty your blood is, and that's how efficient the kidneys are at filtering and getting rid of too much salt.
That's incredible. Now, my whole philosophy about living healthier for longer, and we'll come on to your longevity solution in a moment, but my whole thing is about looking at the way we've evolved, trying to and that evolution takes a very long time. Let's realign what we eat and the way we exercise back to, some 5, 10, 15,000 years ago. So my question next is, do we think there was probably more salt in our diet through evolution than there is today?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I do go into the evolutionary intake of salt. One difference between, let's say, the caveman and what we eat today is we used to consume the entire animal. That included the salty blood, the salty organs, all the interstitial and salty fluids. Now you just get a dry piece of chicken breast. There's no salt there. So if you're eating real foods nowadays, we've lost the salty brine that has been encapsulating all the organs that we used to consume. So if you're eating real food, you need to add that salt back or you're not getting it. The other main difference today versus, let's say, millions of years ago is we're basically, all of us are on salt depleters. That is caffeine in any form. So coffee, tea, they all cause significant losses of salt in the urine. So to give you an example, 4 cups of coffee will cause us to lose a half a teaspoon of salt. Wow. So since all of us are now, most of us are consuming caffeine, we need to think about replacing, those salt losses.
And I know from the longevity solution, we're not saying caffeine's bad or tea's bad. It's just that if we're taking that and we believe that might be part of the longevity solution, what we're saying is you must then also make sure you're getting ample salt.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is all of these, health authorities know exercise is so important for health. What they don't tell you is that we lose salt when we exercise through sweat. And to give you an example, the average loss of salt in sweat is going to be a full half a teaspoon of salt per hour of exercise. And if you're exercising in the heat, you can lose over a full teaspoon per hour of exercise. So if exercise is healthy for us and that activity causes us to lose salt, we should make sure to replace the salt that's being lost.
That's really, really interesting. And of course, we talk about exercise, we talk about changes in diet. And the only one thing I can see, correct me if I'm wrong, that people say is bad about salt is it increases blood pressure. But is it also true that while it may increase blood pressure, too little salt increases your heart rate, and probably increased heart rate as opposed to increased blood pressure is probably more damaging to our cardiovascular system than the salt?
So that's a good question too. So the estimation for the reduction in blood pressure for low salt diets was originally based on mainly unrandomized studies. And what they showed was that if you had normal blood pressure, when they didn't look at really high quality studies, you saw a large reduction in blood pressure, about 14 points on the top and 7 points on the bottom. What ended up happening though is later on, meta-analyses started including only randomized controlled trials. And what they found was the estimation and reduction in blood pressure was overestimated by tenfold. Wow. So in people with normal blood pressure, you're only going to see maybe 1 point reduction on top and about 0.1 points on the bottom or the diastolic. So low salt diets really don't lower blood pressure in people with normal blood pressure. If you have high blood pressure, you may see 2 or 3 point reduction. So yes, there might be a small reduction in blood pressure, but it's not a good beneficial reduction because it just volume depletes you. And it's basically, I could tell you to only consume 1 cup of water per day. I'm going to dehydrate you and I can lower your blood pressure doing that. But that's not a healthy reduction in blood pressure. And you're right. What ends up happening is when you volume deplete someone on a low salt diet, their heart rate goes up. And if you multiply the blood pressure times the heart rate, low salt diets always increase that product of heart rate and blood pressure, and it increases the stress on the heart and the arteries because of it.
That's really interesting. I have an acronym called CRIMES, and I say you should never listen to any newspaper headline without using the letters in the word CRIMES. Was that study controlled? Was it randomized? Was it interventional? Was it measured properly? And did it really look at life extension? Because if it didn't do all of those, then forget those headlines. And I think what you're saying is all that old data, it wasn't properly controlled. And that when you start to do proper studies today, using controls and randomizing it and interventional, that actually the difference is so small that really for most people, it's not an issue at all. And of course, the other problem with low salt is surely it must mess around with the electrolytes within the body.
Yeah, it absolutely does. So what ends up happening is your body's really smart. If you go on a low salt diet, what ends up happening is you start losing less sodium in sweat and you start losing more magnesium and more calcium.
Well, I'm not
So basically, there's definitely a bunch of studies showing that low salt diets cause magnesium and calcium deficiency because you're losing 10 times the amount in sweat now. And it also kicks magnesium out in the urine. So salt is the main controller of your electrolytes because of that, because it controls magnesium, potassium, and calcium.
Well, so that's frightening. So by reducing our salt intake, especially if we're exercising, especially if it's we're living in a warm country, or combining those two, heat and exercise, when the soil today is not giving us enough minerals anyway because the soil's depleted, we're getting this double whammy, because if we're not taking the salt, we're not getting much magnesium through our food, and then we're losing it because we're not getting enough salt. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. I mean, salt too helps us form hydrochloric acid. It allows us to digest food. And that digestion is important to abstract vitamins like vitamin B12, to get numerous minerals like magnesium and B12 through our food. So low salt diets have been proven to basically reduce your stomach acid. And that stomach acid is so vital for us to digest and break down our food and absorb the nutrients. So that's just another way of how a low salt diet can cause us to become vitamin and mineral deficient.
Wow. Do we think that in the coming years we'll start to see some research that says the opposite, that more people are deficient in salt than actually having too much?
Well, if you look in the United States, 6 million people a year are diagnosed with low sodium levels in the blood. It's the most common electrolyte abnormality in the United States. And then the other way of looking at salt deficiency is looking at volume depletion. And there are many, many more people who are dehydrated and volume depleted, and they think it's due to not getting enough water, and it's actually caused by not getting enough salt.
That's absolutely fascinating. So I think we're saying for most, are there certain people that do have to I mean, there's lots of different medical conditions out there. Is there any people we should, before we go and say, look, most people you need more salt, are there any specific illnesses or diseases where people still have to be very cautious on the salt?
So there are a few things that I go in the book and cover that can increase salt retention. One of them is a high carbohydrate, high sugar diet. But if you eliminate the refined carbs and the sugar, you can start peeing out the salt that you used to be able to. So that's one. Two, there are certain people with certain kidney issues that can't get rid of salt and fluid well. Those people, though, actually tend to be hyponatremic or have low sodium levels in the blood. So it's a very sort of tough balance of you can't get rid of a lot of salt and water, but you're actually holding on to more water and your sodium levels are too low. But yes, there are certain people with certain kidney diseases that may need to watch their salt intake. And then even not getting enough magnesium can cause insulin resistance as well and might cause you to retain too much salt. What I try and tell people is use salt to eat healthy foods to provide the potassium and the magnesium to allow you to handle salt well, because salt does need to be balanced by potassium. You want to try to get at least 3 to 4 grams of potassium. If you're not getting that, then a normal salt intake may increase your blood pressure.
And how do you increase your potassium intake?
Well, my kids will not eat their vegetables unless I put salt on it. So it's, using salt to eat healthy, bitter greens that are high in magnesium and potassium it's really the key to not only eating healthy, but it's the key that allows you to exercise better. One of the best things to increase people's ability to work out longer and harder and faster is preloading with salt prior to exercise. So really salt is this very key mineral that's tying in nutrition and also tying in exercise and kind of wrapping it all up in a nice white crystal and allowing people to do these things that we're telling them to do, but they really can't do it without salt.
Okay, got it. So let's finish up on salt then. So if you know you haven't got kidney problems, you're getting your carbs under control now, you're starting to listen to a real plethora of brilliant doctors like yourself, Asim, Dr. David Unwin, and you're cutting down the carbs, you're reducing, therefore, the need for insulin, you're eating wholesome foods. So for those that are on the right track already, final word on salt.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, the important thing with salt, too, people don't realize is iodine. Real salts, real mineral salts bring iodine, and we lose 50 to 100 micrograms of iodine per hour of exercise. We're supposed to get at least 150 micrograms per day. So salt can be a good form for a lot of people to get iodine, and 36 countries are still iodine deficient. So I think that if people are using salt to taste, to eat real natural foods and using it to help boost their exercise and eat high potassium, high magnesium, then you're doing yourself a very good justice by incorporating more salt.
In relationship to iodine, are there certain salts that deliver more iodine, or is all salt good?
Yeah, so really the rock salts are what have iodine in them, like Himalayan, red mineral salt, things like that. The sea salts, which you would think would have a lot of iodine, actually don't. So there you can either get them through rock salt or iodized salt.
Okay, fantastic. And would that, certainly in Britain, I'm not sure about America, but we're getting loads and loads of people that I've got an overactive thyroid or underactive thyroid. And my understanding, I'm not a doctor, but that has a lot to do with iodine. Could it be a salt deficiency that might be accelerating when my wife's got a problem in this area, my sister-in-law's got a problem with her thyroid? Could again that be related to the fact that they just haven't had a lot of salt over the years?
Yeah, no, it absolutely can. So there's very important functions that sodium plays with iodine. Sodium helps bring iodine into the thyroid hormone, into breast milk. So, breastfeeding children can get the vital iodine that they need. Sodium is very important for that. The other thing too is, you're right. Salt, especially rock salts and iodized salt, bring iodine, and iodine helps us form thyroid hormones. So T3 is the active form of thyroid hormone. It has 3 iodine molecules, and T4, which is the inactive form, has 4 iodine molecules. So you need at least 150 micrograms of iodine, and if you're losing it through sweat, you can become depleted in that mineral very quickly.
Look, that's been absolutely fascinating on salt. Can I recommend to anybody listening that if you aren't for some reason yet convinced, the Salt Fix makes great reading. Don't do it over Christmas like I did, otherwise your partner might not be totally over the moon, but it says why the experts got it all wrong and how eating more might save your life. It's a great book, the Salt Fix. So do go out and get that one. Now, we're going to change our attention a little bit to your book, The Longevity Solution. And right early on in that book, you state an article in the New England Journal of Medicine that when I read that, I went and did a lot of research and thought, surely that can't be right. Surely that can't be right. But it is right. And it's shocking. I mean, James, you're a father. I'm a father. Hopefully, well, many people listening will have their own children. Life expectancy in modern society, in Great Britain, in America, if anything, is on the decline at the moment. And that's kind of quite frightening.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is we've replaced the main causes of death in the early 1900s from infectious disease to chronic disease. So basically what you have now is people, what ended up happening is in the early 1900s, you started getting an infusion in the diet of seed oils, trans fats, sugar, and we started refining our carbohydrates because of the invention of the steel roller mill, which basically gave you all these very refined powders instead of eating real whole carbohydrate foods. And so from that moment on and forward, there has been a steady incline in heart disease, diabetes, fatty liver disease, and even our children now are being diagnosed with fatty liver disease. To give you some estimation, about 1 in 3 people will die of heart disease. About 1 in 2 women, if they live long enough, will develop cancer. 1 in 3 men, if they live long enough, will develop cancer. 1 in 3 people have fatty liver disease. And the list goes on and on and on. And so we may have invented all these medications and these surgical devices that were causing us to live longer, but we're living with all of these chronic diseases. So our quality of life has gone down, and now even our life expectancy is starting to go down.
Yeah, and what's really interesting, what you've just said, I've just finished interviewing Ivor Cummins for a podcast, and that was all just talking around the heart and how to avoid a heart attack. but he actually, it's almost like you come from exactly the same page. He said exactly the same things. It's too much sugar, too much processed carbohydrates, and too many seed oil stroke vegetable oils that is in all this packaged food that we're eating, driving the metabolic syndrome and so on. So that's all the bad news. Your book, The Longevity Solution, of course, focuses on the good news and how do you, now that we've got rid of all those infectious diseases, we should be in this place right now where we should live, many of us to be, centenarians, and you pick up on probably 7 or 8 different topics, and I'm just going to pick up on a few of them, probably randomly, and see where the conversation goes. Let's start with something really positive. Let's talk about tea then, let's say, because there's a great book out there also called The Blue Zones, which you cross-referenced a few times. I've done a lot of research on longevity and areas in the world where people live, well into their hundreds, and tea does seem to keep coming up time and time again. Give us a bit of background about why tea should be part of our sort of healthy living.
Yeah, so tea has been used in Asian cultures for thousands of years. It's lighter in caffeine than coffee, but it has all these interesting plant polyphenols, primarily called catechins. Most people know the health benefits from green tea. The main catechin in that is called EGCG. And these catechins help lower blood pressure. They dilate our blood vessels. They improve our insulin sensitivity. They can even increase or reduce blood lipids. And, it has about tea has about a quarter of the caffeine that coffee has. So a lot of people can get away with drinking 9 or 10 cups of tea like they do in most Asian cultures. They just have a pot of tea running all the time and they continuously consume it throughout the day.
That's brilliant to know because, we need to replace some of those things we're consuming that aren't so good for us, like the fizzy pops and all the sodas and tea is just fantastic. Tell me also about something that I love, which is red wine. And you did a lot of research and quoted a lot of studies in the Longevity Solution around, red wine consumption around the world. And again, healthy aging.
Yes, most people know red wine from the French paradox, where people in France, they eat a high saturated fat diet, but they have a low risk of heart disease. In general, most European cultures consume red wine, and they do it in a different way than we do here in America. So most Americans use wine to socially drink, whereas in Europe, they generally consume the wine with their largest meal of the day. And what that can help do is it can help reduce oxidative stress from the foods that you're consuming. It can help lower blood pressure if you consume it with food, and it can help reduce the post-meal spike in blood sugar when you consume red wine. And part of the reason is red wine seems to be a little bit more beneficial than white wine because it's fermented with the grape seed and the skin. You get more polyphenols, more of a substance called resveratrol and quercetin. And these plant polyphenols kind of help dilate the blood vessels and reduce blood platelet clotting and all of these other beneficial effects.
And again, I guess the key thing, and I think you stress in the book, the key thing is this: you just have to be careful that you keep it under control, don't you? Because it goes from very, what looks and appears from all the research, 1 or 2, 3 maybe glasses a day, okay. But if you cross that line to it being too much, then of course, then we're back out on the negative side. Yeah,
alcohol is definitely a slippery slope. And when we were looking at what's the optimal consumption range, really, we felt comfortable with about 3 ounces of wine for women and 6 ounces of wine for men per day seem to be associated with the lowest risk of heart disease.
And what's that in terms of the normal glass? We don't really
Basically, like a half a glass for a woman and a full glass of wine for a man.
Okay, so it's really not a lot at all, but it's a little bit along with the meal. Excellent. Great advice. Thank you very much for that. And a minute ago, you said about obviously too much caffeine. We have to be a little bit careful there as well. But there is quite a bit of study in your book and elsewhere as well that, again, coffee, even though some people see it as a negative, caffeine can be good also for longevity. What's the sort of overrider on how much caffeine we should be taking?
Yeah, I think, the optimal intake of coffee is probably anywhere from 2 to 4 cups per day. When you start going above 4 cups, you don't really see any additional benefit, and you can start getting, disturbances in sleep, increase in heart rate, more anxiety. So again, it's more the lower doses seem to be associated with a lower risk of disease. And really the key compound in coffee is what's called chlorogenic acid. Your body will convert that to caffeic acid, and further will convert that to ferulic acid. And ferulic acid helps it upregulate your own antioxidant enzymes. So coffee is sort of a hack to tell your body to upregulate all its nice antioxidant enzymes. And it's almost like a hormetic effect, which seems also how plants and vegetables seem to actually benefit us, is through this hormetic effect where they're slightly toxic to you, which builds a strong defense over a long period of time. And that is called hormesis.
Yeah, it's that sort of concept of a little bit that doesn't kill you makes you stronger, I guess. And a bit like when we have vaccinations where they put a little bit of the very thing you're trying to protect against, a little bit helps build you stronger, I guess.
It's a perfect example. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, that's 3 things that we can drink: a little bit of wine, predominantly red, some tea, or more tea, a couple of cups of coffee. That's all things that can help us. What I want to do now is just turn the question a little bit, and you write this brilliantly in your book, but for those that haven't read The Longevity Solution yet, tell us a little bit more about what actually causes aging.
So basically, aging is an accumulation of damage where your body's repair mechanisms can't keep up with that damage. And you start developing what are called senescent cells. Some people call them zombie cells. They're basically cells your body has a difficult time of getting rid of and can secrete inflammatory substances that damage you. One of the only substances that I know that can, what are called senolytics, that can break down these senescent or dead cells, is EGCG in green tea, and also fisetin in strawberries. Those are 2 compounds that have been shown that can actually break down these senescent cells. So again, aging is this slow accumulation of oxidative stress and damage, and your repair mechanisms aren't able to keep up with that damage.
Thank you for that. Also in your book, you talk, and this was completely new to me, even though I've written a few books, about protein. I obviously know about protein, but mTOR and how that can affect longevity. And just let me make sure I've got this right. So mTOR is to protein what insulin is to sugar. Did I kind of get that right, in the fact that the body produces insulin to deal with our sugar, but if we overdose also on protein, then mTOR effectively handles the protein, and too much mTOR can also sort of significantly sort of age us. Have I sort of got that one right? Or
Yeah, basically, I mean, too high of insulin can even stimulate mTOR as well, just like eating too much protein consistently. And really, mTOR isn't bad. We need mTOR to build muscle. So you want to cycle your protein intakes and your spikes of mTOR, and then you want to have troughs where you're breaking down damaged cells through autophagy and intermittent fasting. So there is this key of, if you're going to eat a high animal protein diet, you want to make sure to do it during times where you want to build muscle after working out.
Yeah. So that's a really, really, really good point, because I do take my protein shakes in the morning, but then I try and balance the diet properly throughout the day. Very low carbs, medium protein, and healthy fats. But I've always taken that whey protein straight after workout, in the belief that it's repairing the muscles. And I'm in my mid-50s, and I find that if I don't take a whey protein after a workout, I don't really see any benefit. Whereas if I do, then it certainly helps with the repair.
Yep. Yeah, you definitely, there's a 2-hour window where if you consume about 20 to 40 grams of whey protein, that's going to be your optimal window of increasing muscle synthesis and muscle strength. What's really important too, as we age, we slowly become deficient in cysteine. Whey protein helps give us cysteine, which is the rate limiting enzyme for us to form glutathione, which is the body's main antioxidant. So as we age, we need more cysteine, and whey protein is a great way to get more of that amino acid into your diet.
Thank you. That's really, really great. So we need to get our protein right. There's certain things we can drink: the teas, the coffees, the wines. We have to be careful mainly on all that processed food, especially too much sugar, careful with the refined carbohydrates, cut down those nasty seed and vegetable oils. Talk to me now about the good fats. And for those, again, that haven't read the other book that you co-wrote, which is Superfuel, which is obviously talking a lot about quality fats. Talk us through the good fats, the bad fats, and the ugly fats, please, James.
Sure. So the ugly fats would be your trans fats, where basically, you oxidize the seed oils to form a more solid fat. This is like your Crisco, that was put out back in the early 1900s, which is originally from cottonseed oil. So your bad fats are the seed oils, or the oils that are high in omega-6, which would be your soybean oil, corn, safflower, cottonseed. And those are a large part of, not only the American diet, but the UK diet as well. When you cook, fish and chips, you deep fry foods, they're very commonly deep fried in those omega-6 seed oils. And the reason why they're bad for you is twofold. One, they're very susceptible to oxidative stress because they have so many double bonds, which are very susceptible to free radical attack. The second thing is they are low in antioxidants. And really the third thing why they're so bad for you is because when you extract the oil from these tiny seeds, you have to use a very high amount of heat and hexane and all these toxins, and you're already oxidizing the oil before your body even starts oxidizing it. So the bad fats would be your trans fats, or the ugly fats. The bad fats are seed oils, which we just covered. And then I would say your good, okay fats would be your animal fats, your saturated fat, heavy cream, dairy. Those fats I would say are neutral. And then your healthy fats would be your extra virgin olive oil, as well as your marine omega-3s, either from algae or from fish. Those are going to be your really good healthy fats. And MCTs, medium chain triglycerides, are also your really good healthy fats as well. The body burns those fats better than long chain saturated fats, which are in like heavy cream and dairy and things like that.
That's great. Thank you for that. Now, talk there a little bit about omegas, and I want to clear something up for those that aren't fully aware of the difference between omega-6 and omega-3. And I've always said that, or recently I've been saying that it's about getting the two in balance. Omega-3 are definitely the good guys, and it's not so much the omega-6 are the bad guys, but if you don't get them balanced properly, then it plays havoc with many things, our immune system, the brain. I'm thinking Alzheimer's and dementia and so on. Tell us a little bit about the difference between omega-6, omega-3, and how we need to get this in balance.
I think nowadays it is a bad guy because how we're getting our omega-6 is completely different. We used to get omega-6 by eating eggs and plants, and even getting omega-6 through animal foods. But the problem is now is we are getting it through these oxidized seed oils. So our consumption of omega-6 has gone from, an omega-6 to 3 ratio of about 4 to 1 at most. Other people indicate, down to 1 to 1 ratio. They're pretty much balanced in a real, ancient way of eating. Whereas now it's 20 to 1. And the problem with skewing it that way is all these molecules and metabolites are formed off of omega-3 and omega-6. You can get too much inflammation when you're tipping the scale more towards omega-6 and not enough omega-3s. So you really need the balance. At most, you want an omega-6 to omega-3 of 4 to 1, probably ideally 1 to 1. And so because of those seed oils, we're now consuming about 30 to 40 grams of these seed oils at least per day. And think about it. Most people at most are getting maybe 1 gram of omega-3s. And now you're consuming 20 to 40 grams of omega-6. And so really, a lot of times you're not going to see benefits until you drop that omega-6 intake to maybe 4, down from 20 to 40 grams down to maybe 10 or less.
And a lot of people would be listening to this going, well, I don't have seed oils. But of course, vegetable oils isn't from vegetables. It's
right.
Mainly from seeds. Is that correct?
Exactly. And I mean, it's integrated in our entire food system. If you're going out to eat, it's probably being used in what your food's being cooked in. It's probably being infused into the foods. It's probably if you are drinking a soup at a restaurant, there's a high probability that there are numerous vegetable oils that have been put into that soup. So you don't even realize what you're getting.
And that's the whole reason why we've got to come back to wholesome, natural foods that are organic and real, because you just don't know what they're stuffing into. You know, anything with a label on could just have oil, you know, injected just to make it more palatable, for a long shelf life, to make it cheaper to produce. And back to eating real natural foods. Thank you for that, James. Let's now touch on fasting, because I know reading through your books, it's something you talk about quite a lot. I personally have turned my health around over the last 3 years, mainly by fasting. Just wanted, you know, to get your take on it and maybe some advice to those that are listening right now.
So I like to take the concept of do what works for you. For me, skipping breakfast is so easy. I can extend my 12-hour fast out to 16 to 18 hours very easily just by skipping breakfast. I will say, though, that if I worked out really hard the day before, I might not skip breakfast. I might eat 3 or 4 pastured eggs in the morning. So the timing of it, you need to, again, when you want to build muscle, eat more protein, eat more food. When you want to start breaking down your body's old cells through autophagy, fast. And, fasting isn't like some weird voodoo thing. If we weren't able to catch food, or, we weren't able to grab a plant or whatever, there were times where we would just fast and it was okay. I mean, if you're a healthy person, fasting for weeks, the body can do that. But you got to be careful, because a lot of people aren't healthy. So it's the vitamins and minerals that you can start losing that are important if you are supposed to be, doing a fast. So, what I like to think of it is periods of longer fasting, maybe a 2-day fast every couple months, seems to provide additional benefit, especially in people who have cancer. If you fast for 2 to 3 days prior to chemotherapy, there are numerous studies showing that you get less radiation damage, less side effects, and literally improved outcomes if you fast prior to chemo. And again, what fasting does, the reason it does that is when you restrict nutrients, it's the hormetic effect. You're putting a stress on your body by not eating. So your body starts upregulating its own antioxidant enzymes, and it starts preventing the damage to the healthy cells from radiation. And which is why we believe fasting is beneficial, is through that hormetic effect. Same thing that happens with exercise too.
And in a simplistic way, it's also, I think, the fact that your body is either in repair mode or build mode. So therefore, if you're breaking down food because you've just eaten, well, you're certainly not in repair mode while you're breaking down food. But if you're not breaking down food, then the body's kind of in that repair mode. It's a bit like, I guess, is it not, that it's like, you're either a sugar burning machine, you're burning glucose, or you're burning fat. And it's not, you can't do both at the same time. It's one or the other. So the great thing with fasting, while you're fasting, you're not eating, therefore your body's got more space to repair.
That's 100% right. When you restrict particularly protein, but also sugar in the diet, you start activating longevity enzymes such as AMPK, FGF21, and these signals are not only improving insulin sensitivity, so when you get that next meal, your body is more likely to absorb those nutrients better, but you're breaking down all the old and damaged cells. And if your body doesn't need that protein now and you're not getting food, it's going to want to break down that protein and either get rid of it or, repair it and regenerate.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And a minute ago, we touched on omega-3. What's the best sources? How do we make sure we're getting plenty of it? And what's your view on, not having enough omega-3 in terms of, we're seeing a lot of people sadly these days, and sadly including my mother, with dementia. Is omega-3 important for the brain? How do we get more of it?
Yeah, no, omega-3 is definitely important for the brain, particularly DHA. DHA is highly concentrated in brain matter. In fact, I cover in the book, the Salt Fix and Superfuel, that one of ancient humans' ways of getting DHA, the quote-unquote marine omega-3s, was by consuming brain. Humans were basically the only animals that had the tools to break open the skull and get brain tissue, except for maybe hyenas. They have very strong jaws as well, but big cats can't do it. And so DHA is more concentrated in the brain than even salmon. So it's very important for retinal function as well, neuron function, growing new neurons. DHA is very important. And one of the best ways is fresh, wild seafood. Canned seafood is okay, but the problem with like canned sardines and canned tuna, not to say that eating those are bad for your health, but they're not going to be as good as like going and getting a fresh piece of fish, is because the heat that is used to can it can oxidize the cholesterol and the fats in those things. So as fresh as possible, trying to get seafood is one of your best ways to get omega-3s. Also, you could do fish oil supplements, a highly regulated supplement where they test for low oxidation products is a great way as well.
And I guess one of the reasons we're deficient today is that, and you wrote, I can't remember which one of your books now, but you wrote that, back in history, primal wise, more of us live near the sea. I mean, you just mentioned, of course, that we had access to consuming brains of animals, but consuming the brains of animals, we live closer to the sea, more nuts, more seeds. I mean, just, omega-3 is in a lot of wholesome food.
Exactly. So we consume probably 10 times the amount of the parent omega-3 found in plants. And we would convert that as well to long chain omega-3s. And because we were consuming so much of it back then compared to what we were doing now, we were getting about 700 milligrams of long chain omega-3s just by consuming the shorter chain omega-3s from plants. But we migrated out of Africa via the coastline, and we would consume a lot more seafood and omega-3s that way as well.
Thank you. Right, let's come to a conclusion on, and I ask this of most doctors, well, there's 2 questions still to come. First one is, give us, I don't know, 3 or 5 or 7 or 8, however many you want, tips for longevity. I mean, you've done lots of research now around fats, you've done a lot of research around salt and magnesium and the Longevity Solution book. Just give us, ideally, the first thing we should be doing downwards, but give us James's top 5 or top 10 things to live healthier and happier for longer, and things that, if you were sitting down with my children and I was with yours, because we have to do it that way around, because I'm sure you have the same problem. Your children never listen to you, mine never listen to me. So you're sitting with my 7 kids and you say, right, young Bennett, these are things you need to be doing. What's top of the list?
Well, speaking of kids, the top of the list would be stress. So you want to definitely lower stress. And I never realized the importance of stress on health until I actually started researching magnesium. So when you're stressed out, you actually activate the sympathetic nervous system, which actually increases magnesium loss in the urine. So there's actually a mechanism for how stress can cause a depletion in minerals in the body. So, lowering stress is probably number one, because anyone who knows who's gotten into a fight with their spouse, your blood pressure instantly skyrockets, your heart rate goes up. It is literally associated with like a 3-fold risk of having a heart attack. So lowering stress, sleep is extremely important.
Let's stop you there, because actually there's number one, then stress, because Dr. Malcolm Kendrick will say that that's probably number one for reducing heart attacks, which is still the number 1 killer in modern society. So, but I want to pick up on something you said then. Stress causes a depletion of magnesium. Also, earlier on we said not enough salt depletes magnesium. So magnesium keeps coming up and up and up again, time and time again. And I know that of all the sort of vitamins and minerals that we need, what we in Europe we call the NRVs, I think you call them something else, RDAs, I think, in America. But it's so hard to get enough magnesium through the food anyway. So this is something we really need to address, isn't it? The magnesium sort of deficiency.
Yeah, when you process a carbohydrate, you lose at least 80% of the magnesium. Our crops have gone down in magnesium by about 20% through fertilizers and soil depletion. And one of the biggest depleters of magnesium is high insulin levels. High insulin levels kick magnesium out in the urine. About 3 out of 4 adults have chronically elevated insulin levels, which is why magnesium is so important, because 3 out of 4 people have a condition that causes them to lose so much magnesium in the urine. So yeah, Magnesium is definitely up there, and it ties in with stress. It ties in with nutrition.
So number one with my kids is you've got to, certainly as parents, we have to find ways to try and alleviate stress as best as we can, and realize that stress on the body, not short-term stress as in a little bit of weight training or short-term stress of sprinting or anything. That's something very different, but chronic stress for long periods of time, very, very dangerous. How do we, as a generation, realize that is the case? Are our kids on Facebook too much, therefore making comparison causes stress? As parents, do I think you can to reduce stress? Number one.
Exactly. Yep. Number one.
Number two.
I would say being a part of your community, which ties in with stress. I mean, if you look at any longevity culture, they have a very strong tie to their community. And so that goes along with social interaction and laughing. My grandmother used to always say laughter is the best medicine. And I think she was right. We all feel better when we laugh. So part of stress and lowering that is being more part of your community. So that would be number two. Getting good sleep would be number three. Nutrition, so lowering those three toxins, seed oils, refined carbs, sugar, and eating a nutrient-dense diet. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that there are key minerals and vitamins that you need every single day to have an optimal health. If one of them being choline, if you're not eating pastured eggs or liver, you might not be getting just one of the 29 vitamins and minerals that you need every single day. So really, it's not just about eating a nutrient-dense diet. It's pairing your foods so you're hitting optimal amounts of every single vitamin and mineral. Exercise is obviously extremely important as well. And then doing things like, sauna therapy and increasing heat shock protein, either through, working out outside or in the heat, is also a beneficial thing for longevity.
That's absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much for that. So I just want to recap on those then. So we are de-stressing as much as we can. We're socially interacting with our community, with our loved ones. And in fact, I've just been reading a book around happiness, and that's that intimate relationship, not just husband and wife, but, really getting on with your kids that you can share things with, and communities. And in fact, the World Health Organization, some 60, 70 years ago said the three pillars of health. One is, obviously physical health, mental health, and that's social health as having a community. So it's great that we're all starting to realize that. And do you agree that really means face-to-face, not, let's not have our kids going, well, I'm getting that, Dad, anyway, because I'm on Facebook all the time and Instagram. You mean physically being together and sharing experiences.
Exactly.
And then we talk about making sure those three things that are in all processed foods, we're cutting down the sugars, refined carbohydrates, and those seed/vegetable oils, and then making sure we're getting really good nutrition, exercise, and pretty much the only one you haven't said that Malcolm said the other day is, what's your view on sunshine, getting plenty of sunshine?
Yeah, sunshine too, for sure, 100%, because not only is sunshine helps us produce vitamin D, but it's beneficial for relaxation, lowering blood pressure, things like that.
That's fantastic. So, over to you. Well, before I go over to you for one final thought, again, I ask all the doctors because, I'm sure the same in America, in Great Britain, NHS is full of really passionate doctors that are doing their best they can at the coalface, as I say, to try and make people better. But the one question, and you said this right at the beginning of the hour, I'd rather be into prevention rather than cure. And it's probably the same answer we've just said. What's the bit of advice for all ages? Just do this to stop all these chronic illnesses happening in the first place. What's that sort of magic bit of advice?
I mean, it comes down to start cooking at home. Stop eating out so much because they're dumping in all those toxins. Your quickest way to eliminate those toxins is to take control of the foods that are going inside your body. And so go to the grocery store or order healthy foods offline and cook them yourselves in your home, because you're not only going to, be eating healthier, but when you cook at home with people, there's your part of your community, right? You're socializing, you're laughing. I like to turn on music when I cook. And I know Rangan Chatterjee is a very big advocate of, putting on the music and cooking, and it's very good for stress reduction as well.
That's brilliant. And final question, what would you like your legacy to be? All your doctors that are writing great books, that are still treating patients and so on and so forth, but you're writing some great stuff, trying to get the message out there. Which bit of the jigsaw would you like to say, well, Dr. James, that's where he helped change the way America and Great Britain sort of that stop that downward spiral, stop that decrease in lifespan? Where do you see yourself fitting into what we're all trying to achieve at the moment?
Well, of course, I would love to see, or be viewed as someone who really opened people's minds that it's not really salt that's bad for us, it's sugar. And hopefully I've helped to really, help people understand which is the really harmful white crystal in the diet.
That's absolutely fascinating. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Just to recap for everybody that's watching, Longevity Solution is definitely worth a read. It's written in cooperation with Dr. Jason Fung, who's also a brilliant author. It talks about a little bit around the blue zones, but also around the fact that sugar's not the devil. It talks about magnesium, talks about coffee, tea, and a little bit of wine. Superfuel, another fantastic book, teaching us about the difference between the good, the bad, and the evil fats. And then, of course, my favorite Christmas read, the Salt Fix, will make you really reapproach the way you think about salt. Dr. James, thank you very much for spending time with us today. And I hopefully, at some stage, will either see you in the States or here in the UK.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Steve.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, then why not subscribe to the full series so you can hear from all the incredible health professionals we spoke to. For the full story, you can also get the book Fat and Furious, written by Steve Bennett, available on Amazon. And to say a huge thank you for watching us here on YouTube, we are even offering you an exclusive Amazon discount code so you can get yourself a copy. For more details, head to the description below.